Biodiversity, I think, is the key to this region, and we're blessed with 2 World Heritage Areas here. It's one of the reasons that David Attenborough has this as his favourite place, and it is because we've got this incredible richness of fauna and flora. Particularly what's a more hidden secret, which is our beautiful rainforests, the oldest rainforests in the world, right here on our doorstep. Without any question, the best way of people experiencing the wet tropics is to go out with somebody who knows a bit about it and share their knowledge and passion. Our zoo experiences that are a learning, educational and hands-on often experience, and our natural environment. That's by far the best way of being able to really understand, and when you understand you care, and when you care you share.
As a traditional owner, it's a spiritual animal. It's involved in stories, and our language name for it is Gundoi. And today we have a lot of pressures on our country in Mission Beach, and we're losing a lot of the habitat of the cassowary. Well, I'd like to have cassowaries here in the future. And once he's gone, we can't replace it. And it's that linkage with other animals and plants, and that's already happened too much in this country. We'd like him to be always here.
It's an interesting place to live, with kangaroos that live in the trees, prehistoric birds that have decided not to fly and walk through the forest, and the gliders are a mammal that have taken to the sky, and for an efficient way to move, that they glide between the trees in the tropical woodlands of the far north tropics. It's a magic species in a magic landscape. We believe the population is somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 animals remaining in the wild. Their greatest threat is loss of habitat, and the majority of that has already happened. So our biggest need at the moment is to put back connections between the remaining habitat that's there. They're also threatened by the fact that the traditional burning is what's kept these forests open for thousands of years. And those burning regimes have stopped in more recent decades, or they've been changed so that the forest is not being sustained as open forest as well as it might be. Fire is an essential part of what they need. Highways, the power lines, the railways, our roadways all break up the habitat and cause what we speak about as fragmentation. Once that barrier is there, it's very difficult for the gliders to cross the barrier unless there's very tall trees directly either side of the roadways, and mostly we try and remove those too because we see them dangerous to cars. What we're working on, or what we've been working on in recent years, is putting in poles so that the gliders, very tall poles either side of major highways and roadways, to allow the gliders to move from one side of the road to the other quite safely. I absolutely believe that with good planning, we can actually find a middle ground, and that we can share the landscape between the wild places that we have established and the areas that we need to protect. We can share the space in between. It's really simple. By just keeping a few trees to allow animals like the gliders to move through their landscape, we can still have development and farming, and I think it's essential for the future of this species for us to start talking respectfully to each other instead of being polarised about the things that we can do together. Let's forget about put in too hard basket the things that we can't do, but let's work on the things that we can.
So the conservation of the Kuranda tree frog in this area is quite difficult, but there are some elements which also make it a lot easier. The rural residential component means that people have particularly come to this area because of its rainforested nature and are quite environmentally minded and conservation minded, and so they've tended to reforest what were open paddocks and basic farmland that was in the past had been dairying or coffee or just cattle grazing properties. They have reforested those properties, and so it means that we do have some reasonable buffers along the creeks. So that makes it easy. What makes it difficult is that whatever happens in the catchment above the creeks where these frogs are found will possibly produce a problem down in the lower part. So the biggest issue that we've got is changes in the forestation of the catchment, which may generate sediments. Now the sediments flow down the creeks and they cover up the beautiful shallow breeding riffles that these frogs need. I think it's really important to recognise that the survival of these endangered species, and in fact all species really, all wildlife in general, is going to be down to the communities in which they occur. As we spread out across the landscape, human beings have altered landscapes, altered environments where wildlife occur, and if we are to do anything to halt this and reverse this decline of species across the world, we're going to have to learn to live with the creatures that inhabit the spaces that we start to invade.
The spotted-tailed quail in far north Queensland is being isolated from the main other species, southeastern Queensland, for over 200 years. Being isolated, they become an individual genetic species, and it's our responsibility to actually hold that species in place. Because if we lose them, you can't replace that species. Most people don't realize that this animal is here only for 3 years and they die, that's it. So if you break the wildlife corridor that is established or was established previously, if a male doesn't get across to the habitat of the female, that's it, it's over. You know, in 3 years, the entire colony will die. Public is the ones that are going to move and change laws in Australia. It's a responsibility for all of us about our Australian wildlife. It is a species that nobody knows anything about it. Scientifically, everything is known about it, but from the public point of view, it's very little that they know that we've got this species that actually are considered as a cousin of the thylacine. One of the biggest problems is rainforest fragmentation. On top of that is also the lack of management. We haven't been looking for these animals for a long time. Since 2001, that was the last time that this animal scientifically were looked upon, and those times was about 540 species in the area, and now we're finding that if we've got 350 of them in far north Queensland, we are very, very lucky.
About 20 years ago, we knew that bettongs occurred in 4 populations, and that's the reason that they were listed as endangered. They're actually a local endemic species, so they occur in our backyard, just west of Cairns. But we now actually know that they've dropped out of 2 of those populations, so we've had a 50% reduction in the number of populations that there are, so that's really bad news. The good news is that in their main population in the Lamb Range, actually not very far from Cairns, they are stable, so they're holding on there really well so far. So the northern bettong is a tiny little kangaroo. It's a marsupial, it has a pouch. But the most interesting thing about the northern bettong is that it feeds on truffle fungi. So the bettongs are really important for the health of the ecosystems because they eat the fungi and move the spores around, and then the spores are attached to the roots of the plants. They actually help keep the plants healthy. The truffles aren't around sometime in the dry season. They do feed on the basis of grasses, and they do this funny behaviour where they chew up the grass and then they spit it out. So they form little spitballs, and they leave them in the forest for us to come along and find. So the bettongs are actually threatened by a lack of adequate fire, and we've noticed that that's the big difference between the 2 populations that remain and the populations where they've dropped out is actually a lack of fire management. If we connect with our wildlife, we'll value them, and we won't let them drift off and be lost for our future generations.
Over the years, most of Marby Forest has been cleared for agriculture. It's those beautiful, deep, rich red soils that enable this very productive forest to grow. Also allows for wonderfully productive agriculture on the tablelands. Of recent years, there's some of the small patches have suffered from fire, from encroachment from stock. But there's a lot of good things happening as well. Many farmers are planting around their little patches of Marby forest to make them more secure and treat. And the Barron River Catchment Care have been planting along the Barron, along Peterson Creek, and building corridors between small patches to enable wildlife to move between them. Marby Forest is a wonderful forest.
Having David Attenborough say that it's his favourite place and one of our animals here, one of our endangered animals, would be on his ark. If this isn't a bucket list place to come and explore and visit, then I don't know what is.
The really important thing that everybody should realise is that they can actually get involved with conservation, get out and volunteer on projects where you actually get to see the animals up close and personal, and these are endangered species, so not many people get to do that.